story of the State Hermitage Museum is a microcosm of Russian history. It's witnessed dramatic events, war and revolution. But the art has survived to tell the tale. Through the imperial splendor, everywhere you're reminded that it's a palace.
The spirit itself and taste is also a monument. You can feel it in every gallery, and we are lucky to have interiors and to keep the spirit of palace.
You could imagine how the emperors and the empresses were living in these places and dancing and doing a lot of other things.
Behind the scenes today, instead of czars, there are museum curators preserving the art for future generations.
I think the Ermitaž has so much more resonance in the heart of a Russian man or woman. It's more than a museum. It's really part of the soul of the nation.
It's becoming living museum, living from one generation to another, coming from all these stories.
In the throne room of the Winter Palace, the court of St. Petersburg gathers to celebrate the anniversary of the State Hermitage Museum. A labyrinth of 2,000 rooms with 3 million objects. It's one of the biggest museums in the world. Founded in 1764 by Catherine the Great, who came to the throne dramatically in a coup d'etat, taking on the title Empress of all the Russias. Catherine's passion was collecting.
Ambitions knew no ends. Russia has to come to the level of European countries. Not only army, not only navy, culturally, everything should be on that level. And also collections. Then it should be endless and absolutely impressive. She acquired 3 major collections en bloc, really. 1760s, she was able to buy the collection of Count Brühl in Dresden.
This painting, which is Titian's first masterpiece, was acquired by Empress Catherine the Great. This painting was described by Giorgio Vasari as one of Titian's first works in Venice.
And the acquisition of collection of Crozat in 1771 was certainly one of the major things for the collection, because it included also first Raphael that came to Russia. It was on itself something like 400 paintings. And then 1779, and it was very political also decision that she was buying a collection of Robert Walpole. He was Prime Minister for England. She was trying just to show Europe that Russian money is unlimited, absolutely unlimited. And Walpole collection, it is 200 paintings nearly, 198, and of the first quality.
It was not just a whim of a capricious woman, it was always a serious matter for her. For instance, she bought the Walpole collection, then Russia was in two wars, one with Swedes on the north and one with Turks on the south. Even at such a serious and difficult moment for the country, she was able to spend money for buying pictures. So she understood very, very well how it worked for her image.
You can just imagine that these ships arriving here opposite to the palace and then unloading them, and all these crates come into this corridor and simply filling the walls.
As well as the 4,000-old masters, Catherine bought sculpture.
Catherine II made very, very important acquisition. She bought the collection of Marquis Light Brown in 1787.
This job lot of 250 classical sculptures from England was discovered quite by chance to contain a masterpiece by Michelangelo. The director of the Hermitage is Professor Mikhail Piotrovsky, who followed dynastically in his father's footsteps.
The first place I came, it was Ermitaž when I began to work. We lived nearby and my father worked in Ermitaž all his life, so I was brought here. So I have this experience from my childhood, the museum experience and the experience of archaeology and studying ancient history. I have studied the profession from the beginning. I was watching how my father was doing it. He was a great person and certainly he was a great director. In the middle of the 19th century, these rooms have been rooms of the, let's say, the government, because the State Council of Russia was situated here, and the place which is my office, the room which is my office, was the Cabinet of Ministers of Russian Empire. Then they all moved to another bigger buildings, but we still feel that we are part of the governing body of Russian Empire.
The Hermitage was originally ruled by imperial tsars. Now the directors are state-appointed. The desk in Piotrovsky's office belonged to Tsar Alexander III, but has since disappeared under piles of papers. Catherine the Great's private obsession was collecting engraved gemstones.
Добрый день. Здравствуйте. Прошу прощения за беспокойство, но хочется очень показать.
Preserved in their original Röntgen cabinets away from the public eye.
Хранилось, как хранится теперь. Well,
думаю, что почти без изменений.
what we see now, we have can see how Catherine the Great was keeping her collections, and definitely these are wonderful. Well, it's not showcases, but wonderful pieces of art. We tried to keep as it was in Catherine time because she also had it in storage. There's a way how you keep them. So I'll show you how it is.
This is unbelievable. And these cabinets were specially built, I understand.
These cabinets have been specially built for Catherine.
And this tells you a bit about her, doesn't it? The kind of quantity.
Yes, quantity and quality, because this is a very important part of Ermitaž and Catherine the Great's acquisitions. It was always quality, which was very high. The collection are the best names, but also the best things from the best names.
Catherine also collected silver. The collection in the Hermitage shows the wealth of the imperial tsars living in the Winter Palace, who actually used these for their banquets. And she had this Sèvres porcelain dinner service specially created for her lover, Prince Potemkin. Although the Hermitage was created by Catherine the Great, it was her predecessor, Peter the Great, founder of St. Petersburg, who also collected widely. A small throne room was built in his memory, currently under restoration. He'd acquired from tomb robbers the ancient Scythian gold from nomadic tribes in Crimea, dating back to the 7th century BC. Siberia yielded yet more treasures. Peter also got a very special exhibit through a swap.
The most famous sculpture of the Hermitage came under the reign of Peter the Great. You can see it in this gallery, and it came in 1719. It was given to Peter the Great by Pope Clement XI as exchange for relics of St. Brigitta.
When she died, Catherine the Great left a huge artistic legacy that was a hard act to follow. But every Romanov added something to the Hermitage. In the early 1800s, her grandson, Alexander I, defeated Napoleon. A portrait of every general who fought appears in the 1812 gallery. He was also a collector.
First acquisition was certainly for sculpture from the collection of Josephine Beauharnais, the wife of the Napoleon. And the works of Canova are something sentimental.
Alexander also acquired great paintings from Paris. Alexander's brother, Nicholas I, was to make a huge impact on the architecture of the Hermitage by building a victory chariot and a column in memory of Russia's triumph over Napoleon. He also added a museum wing to the Winter Palace.
This gallery was a part of the new Hermitage, the first public museum constructed by Nikolai I.
The new Hermitage building, which is impressive one and I think quite unique in the world, and every visitor, believe me, say wow, entering this interior.
The space is wonderful. It's a great example how the masterpiece of museum architecture has been done. This is new Ermitaž building by Leo von Klenze, which still is considered to be one of the best museum buildings in the world, and it is. That's part of what Ermitaž is. We are keeping the memory of Russia and Russian Empire and Russian history, not only by objects, but trying to, with the buildings, and trying to remind people what our history is.
In 1837, all the treasures were nearly lost forever.
All Winter Palace was burned down. Ermitaž was saved because immediately when the fire began, they closed the doors and they began to put water on the walls so the fire and the heat wouldn't go to Ermitaž, which had all the collections. So they saved the collections.
Within just a year, the Winter Palace was rebuilt by Nicholas I. Reportedly, many serfs lost their lives restoring it to its original state.
In 1852, it was opened for public as the first public museum in Russia.
One of today's most popular exhibits is the Madonna Lita by Leonardo da Vinci.
No, certainly now, when you come to the Hermitage, you see that there are crowds around Leonardo, endless crowds. People that, when they come to the Hermitage, they all need to see Da Vinci. Second painting, Madonna Benoit, it was one of the greatest lucks of the Hermitage, that it was discovered in St. Petersburg, in the private family of Benoit. And then it was decided to buy it for the Hermitage. Nicholas II, who had no artistic interests, in this case, he gave the money, because for that time, it was the highest price for the painting.
At the end of the 19th century, the Hermitage lived through Russia's era of massive social change. There was huge dissent against the Tsarist autocracy, who still ruled from the Winter Palace. With the onset of the First World War, St. Petersburg was renamed Petrograd. Parts of the Winter Palace changed their function and became a hospital, and later an orphanage. By 1917, the museum's treasured collection was in jeopardy and was packed up into crates for shipping to safety in Moscow, out of reach of the advancing German army.
when foreigners are in the Baltic, we have to evacuate collections. It was in 1917. There are also 3 trains. 2 managed to go out of Petrograd, went to Moscow, and the 3rd stopped because the October Revolution happened and there was no way to get to Moscow. Objects came back.
It wasn't just the Germans that Tsar Nicholas II had to worry about. The Bolsheviks were uprising against him.
The revolution had a great impact on the Hermitage and, of course, the Winter Palace as well, which was residency of the Tsar's family, even though it wasn't as dramatic as in Eisenstein film.
Revolution is like a fire. And so when the situation became difficult, the director of Ermitaž closed the doors to the Winter Palace. So when the Winter Palace was stormed, the Ermitaž saved itself. They didn't let anybody to get into the museum. And at a certain moment, they opened other doors to the members of Revolutionary Guard who came just to protect the collection.
The clock in the White Dining Room stopped at 2:10, the exact moment the Bolsheviks broke in and arrested the provisional government, who were meeting around this table.
Only 5 days after the October Revolution, Minister of Public Enlightenment issued a decree ensuring that both Winter Palace and the State Hermitage became the museums.
Nicholas II and his entire family were executed, marking the end of the Romanov dynasty. Their portraits were slashed. Petrograd was then renamed Leningrad, and the capital of Russia moved to Moscow. Incredibly, all the remaining contents of the palace and the museum were kept intact, now seen as property of the people. This period of change saw a new wave of artists take center stage at the museum.
After the revolution, traditional artists didn't immediately accept the new Bolshevik power, and it was left or avant-garde artists who offered their services to the new state. Kazimir Malevich was the father of suprematism. In 1915, he exhibited his famous Black Square.
This movement was to inspire another Russian artist, Kandinsky, to produce some of his greatest paintings. Private ownership of art was now forbidden. Collections of Russia's old nobility became state-owned. The Hermitage was about to acquire some of its most important works directly from the home of wealthy Moscow merchant Sergei Shukin, who'd been forced to flee Russia.
Of course, he couldn't take with him something, not only money, letters, documents, nothing. His collection was nationalized. Van Gogh, Cézanne, and then Matisse. And Picasso was the latest comer. But in the 30s, this art, modern art, was not greeted in the country.
With the Tsars gone, the museum was now run by directors under government control. This new Western art was branded as decadent, banned and not to be shown. Instead, objects were reclassified according to their communist value.
So the time archaeology became the main source of objects and the main trend of scientific research in Ermitaž. So it's also history of Ermitaž, and we have here several rooms which are dedicated to results of work of Russian archaeologists.
The world's oldest carpet was discovered in Siberia by Hermitage curators. It was preserved in ice in the frozen tombs of Pazyryk, dating back to 500 BC. After Lenin died, Stalin's reign was to have a catastrophic impact on the Hermitage. Russia's industrialization plan was financed by selling the country's art, including silver and old masters from the museum, to pay for tractors and machine tools.
The National Gallery was founded as a gift to the nation by the financier Andrew Mellon, who made a fortune in banking and energy. He began collecting old master paintings. There were more works offered than the 21 he acquired. They were great old masters that the Russian government decided to sell to raise cash at the time.
You know, in 1911, there was a guidebook published by Alexander Benoit, Russian historian of art. And sometimes it seems to me when I just turn the pages of this guidebook and see the reproductions there, the images, they just took this book into their hands, you know, and just put the finger, I want this, was this and this, because you can see that all these masterpieces, a lot of them are reproduced in this book.
It's really pretty exciting to go through this museum and say, oh, wow, that's a fabulous painting. It turns out, oh, that was Andrew Mellon. Oh, my gosh, it came from the Hermitage.
Well, it was an extraordinary coup, no question about it. I think he paid something north of $6,600,000 at the time for them. Can't imagine. It was quite an extraordinary thing historically. Still is, for that matter.
It was a national tragedy because defense was difficult because, well, politically, no real possibility of saying no was existing in the 30s.
Museum director Orbeli wrote to Stalin begging him to halt the sell-off. But the purge didn't stop at art. It went to the very heart of the Hermitage. In one of the least resolved and darkest chapters of its history, the staff themselves were under threat. Seen as enemies of the people, they were sent to the Gulag prison camps.
Many people from the Hermitage spent their time in Gulag. People were sent because of their being the member of the noble family, being the son or the daughter of the officer of Tsar army.
My grandfather, Nikolai Bauer, had worked in the Hermitage more than 25 years, and he was arrested and in September executed.
Over 45 curators were sent to the Gulag. some never to return. The full stories remain a mystery.
And do you know why they were sent away?
I don't know why they were sent away. Don't know.
My father was in prison for a short time, half a year. But it was beginning, and thank God, then he was freed, and he, I think, was using that decision that hasn't done anything wrong in the next years which came.
Vor uns liegt Deutschland, in uns marschiert Deutschland und hinter uns kommt Deutschland.
Так вот, Гитлер объявлял, это ж я сама слышала, Гитлера слова, что поскольку вы не пускаете, не даете взять город, то город все равно возьмем и сравняем его с землей.
Ermitaž, as maybe no other museum in the world, lives through a lot of calamities, especially the Second World War, because there was a question of being destroyed absolutely, or being robbed and everything taken out and brought to different places in Germany. So when Germans began coming close to St. Petersburg, Ermitaž was prepared for evacuation. It was Orbeli's decision. They have been prepared, and they began to prepare collections for evacuating to Urals. Three trains have been prepared. Two managed to leave Leningrad. The third has to go back because the siege was closed. The same thing happened in 1917.
They were put into crates and they were carried to Ural Mountains as all other things. So just frames were in the walls.
With most of the collection safe, the curators and their families sheltered in the cellars underneath the Winter Palace.
The Germans bombed all the food stores, and it was extraordinary. Kind of the smell of burning sugar was absolutely hanging over Leningrad. You smell it everywhere and so on. No food anymore, kind of bombs started coming the whole time. And then the Germans surrounded.
Didn't your father come here as the fire warden?
Yes, definitely. Well, my father was the fire warden. They have been mostly at night, so they have been going through these rooms at night during the war. And we have a picture, one of the pictures which is so dark, dark, dark. It's exactly of this room during the night, at night during the war.
Everything was concentrated on what to eat next. and all kind of things appeared, you know. First of all, belts, which my father kind of had a lot at home. So these belts were slowly cooked till they were quite soft, and they were quite delicious. Then my grandmother, first of all, she had a cat. Then my mother said, well, you must decide who is more precious to you, your cat or your granddaughter. So she cried and gave us her cat. Cats are delicious, absolutely delicious.
Soldiers who came from the front, who were hungry, who were tired of battles and all these things. One of the guides made an excursion around the Hermitage, and he showed just empty frames, but talked about the paintings. He described them, and people were standing and listening, and everybody were happy to listen, even then they couldn't see the paintings.
A third of the population died in the siege, including over 100 Hermitage staff.
The first exhibition was opened at once, shortly after the victory, and after, step by step, galleries have been opened and these sculptures occupy their places.
During the war, the idea of compensation restitution arose in all the countries fighting Germany, but certainly especially in Russia, because a lot of Russian heritage was stolen, was taken by Germans. Then there was a decision that when we win and come to Germany, first of all we'll take our collections back, and then we'll take some of them as compensation for what is done to our country. So we do have some of the paintings and some archaeological material.
Many hidden treasures seized from the Nazis were long kept in storage. Because Germany wanted them back, it was too controversial to exhibit them.
In 1995, there was a permission to show those paintings. Let's go, they're here.
My opinion is that whatever was taken during the war, it's all right, but it should be shown to the public. It shouldn't be kept hidden away for years and years and years. That's my opinion, but that's just my opinion, you know.
The sin is not to show art. You have to show art. If you have something, you must show it, and then discuss to whom it does belong. It's maybe still our socialist upbringing and education. It's important. Art is more important than property and money. I'm afraid not everybody thinks this way today, but still it's what we try to teach in Ermitaž.
After Stalin's death, the post-impressionist art seized in the 20s could at last be shown.
Stalin had no idea maybe about such painting. The people around Stalin and Stalin himself, they hated such art. Only from '56 we started here to show Impressionists, then Van Gogh again, Matisse, Picasso, and now every important painting of such artists is on view.
In 1964, another archaeologist, Piotrowski's father, Boris, was made director of the Hermitage. It was a hub for academic study, but due to the Cold War, virtually no tourists came. Professor Mikhail Piotrowski succeeded his father, becoming director in 1992.
I've grown up in Ermitaž, so I think it's very natural that when Ermitaž needed some special treatment, a person who was grown up in Ermitaž but wasn't working in Ermitaž was somehow chosen.
Russia's perestroika saw the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Leningrad was renamed St. Petersburg.
Well, in this perestroika period, when I had no money to protect, no money to restoration, no money to keep the roof in a good shape, we didn't understand what it does mean if you don't stop, just maintain the building. So we learned from our colleagues in Europe and America who live in the jungle of market economy how you do behave in this situation. So we managed to count the money. We managed to work with small amounts of money for construction and for acquisition. We managed to bring together friends of Ermitaž to get money from the government.
St. Petersburg has long been the cultural capital of Russia. Today, the power base is Moscow, and Piotrowski regularly travels there for meetings. His role as director is as much political as it is cultural.
Putin, as a ruler, it's very much in Russian tradition, and he has made a lot of important decisions in helping development of the museum. But there is another story. He comes from St. Petersburg. He's, by the way, the first ruler of Russia after Nikolai II, who comes from a big city.
Уважаемые пассажиры, до отправления скоростного поезда номер 163 Сапсан, Петербург, Москва, остается 5 минут.
So in a way he understands this, and he is a cultural person who has the right feeling of Ermitaž. He was the first who began not only to send his guests to Ermitaž, he began to come with his guests to Ermitaž. For us, for Russia, it's a rare thing. I think it's also rare for other countries, let's say.
Express train number 163 Sapsan, bound for Moscow, is due.
Maybe the beginning of what I call Ermitaž becoming global. It's not open the door, it's just open the door like Peter the Great and go out and be present everywhere. That's globalization of this museum, and because it deserves to be a museum which belongs to the whole world.
Nowadays, the Hermitage art travels widely in collaboration with museums all over the world. A loan of 70 paintings was agreed to Houghton Hall in England to help recreate Sir Robert Walpole's original collection, which had been sold to Catherine the Great.
All you see here is of the time, so nothing has changed. Everything has been returned to its original position. So on either side, sort of in prime position, you have those two very great portraits by Van Dyck, which are in the Ermitaž, and those are among the best portraits by Van Dyck in any museum. So what we have tried to do here is to recreate the collection as it was. In other words, to rehang the pictures, how the pictures were displayed in the 18th century.
It's once-in-a-lifetime exhibition, and certainly is a legacy for the house. And I think for our two countries' relationship, I think is very... After all, the arts is a way of bridging, of making bridges between countries, and you couldn't get a better example of that, and at this time, than this exhibition.
Came to enter the Ermitaž in there with... Piotrowski has been a globetrotter, sort of exploring the collections of the world. He's taken the museum from one century to the next, from one world to the next as well. It's quite a difficult transition from Soviet times to contemporary times.
what is important for us is to show that museum is a vivid organism, that it's not an old dusty archive, but is something that is living, and the contemporary sculptures as well as old sculptures are on the same level of art history. So by introducing some new works, we also point to the old works, and people who come to see something new, they rediscover the old ones.
Of the 27 works in the original Dionysus room, I retained 5. So all of them were taken off their plinths, placed directly on the ground. That basically allowed you to stand on the same level as the sculpted mythical figures of Venus, Athena, Eros, and others. And that was my concept for, in a way, rebooting the power of these ancient works.
The idea was that in one room we have only Greek sculptures, and in another room we have only Antony's work. And through the doorway it was a dialogue in between them.
It was a difficult project and like a shock when these iron, ugly from our point of view, stages have been on display on that gallery. But everybody was amused, everybody, because they were friendly. And we can see as visitors try to imitate the poses, like this, and so on.
It's the tone of the Hermitage to host the Contemporary Art Biennial Manifesta, featuring living artists working and exhibiting within the museum. Cats have traditionally lived under the Winter Palace since it was built.
I think my small little film for the Manifesta will be only filmed in the basement. So I will concentrate on. Yeah, I see this. I see the cats as a subculture.
Okay.
So they are my friends, and they are my community, and I talk with, you know. I will make a kind of installation with wood and carpet, and also like you know, with this around the wood where the cat climb and stuff. So a kind of cat place, but then for humans.
The new home for contemporary art in the Hermitage is known as the General Staff Building.
Architectural plans are part of our general idea of great Ermitaž. I think what we have done in the General Staff Building is using the historical buildings without destroying their nature, using them for museum.
I think that the key thing to understand is that in Russia everything is bigger and emptier than anywhere else. Every time I see the Neva, I find it literally unbelievable that the river can be so wide and that the square can be so large and that largeness is not scary or not offensive, but actually that there can be a combination of largeness and intimacy almost. There is a kind of experience of getting the masses through the former spaces of rulers. Therefore, it is inevitably not a kind of rare experience anymore, but a kind of common experience. And so we are trying to enrich the experience of being there.
Ermitaž was founded as a private collection of Catherine. It was to show the glory of Russia. It was always palace and museum together.
The Hermitage is both, a collection and a monumental history, and it's not only, a display box. It has a lot of historical events that happens in this room, and we know about this.
I think the Hermitage is unique because you feel like you're visiting a place in which history really did change. This is a tectonic plate in the story of human culture.
And that makes it not just a gallery of art, but also the historical place, very important for people.
Art. It belongs to the world and to everybody, so it must be shown. Certainly the most democratic museum because it's something for everybody. It has art in it, but it also lives by its rooms. And this is Russian cultural history. Palace and museum together.